Recommended reading, Revelation chapter 6. Recommended reading in the Psalms is 59, 60, and 61 in the Psalms. Have an open heart. If you're watching this for any reason, you feel like you're beyond the Bible, and or you feel like you understand the Bible, and don't have room for any teachability, well, either way, consider being teachable and understanding the universal principles that are being discussed here that pertains to all of us, whether or not we ever pick up a Bible or not, whether or not we ever look at the book of Revelation or not. I will say, just in its own defense, book of Revelation said in the first chapter that happy is he who's reading and those who are hearing the words of the prophecy and paying attention to the things written in it, for the time is near. You know, happiness, you say, well, that's not a big deal, happiness, so what? No, people are pretty focused on being happy. See that in social media world and everything else. This is, YouTube is the social media world. But this kind of happiness is similar to what was being spoken when the Master was talking about, on the Sermon on the Mount. This is a happy, or you a blessed kind of a thing. A certain fulfillment and happiness and freedom and life that's in understanding and hearing, because unless you have an ear to hear, you won't hear it. You can, preachers out there have made it clear that you can vent all kinds of things from this book and make all kinds of conclusions that have nothing to do with hearing by the Spirit. It's just completely concocted in the mind of man. And there's all kinds of predictions and ideas, and it only applies to when it was written. There's going to be scorpions running down the streets. There's going to be two people with white beards called the two witnesses, all kinds of things. And it would seem apparent, well, it says that. He who has an ear to hear, that this is a spiritual book, that John was in the Spirit, that he's literally seeing things as a signification, as a sign and a symbol of spiritual things, not the actual physical signs or symbols is what is actually going to occur. It's actually the spiritual message in it. The Son of Man speaks by parables, by analogies. That's what, even back to the Old Covenant, when Elisha said the Son of Man is going to be speaking by analogies. How do you recognize the Son of Man? He doesn't say it straight to your face, because in reality your mind is unable to understand anyway. It's only in your spiritual mind, in the spirit man, in the inner man of the heart, that has an ear to hear, that can actually understand these things. And it's more of a seeing of these things than a mathematical understanding. A plus B equals C. It's much more profound than that. And you would think, well, then how does that work? Because if I can't feel what you can feel, and you can't feel what I can feel, so how do we ever get on the same page? By a miracle. This is unity in the scriptures. In Psalms 133, it talks about unity being like oil that drips down the beard and onto the robes. This kind of unity is a metaphor, very, very, very much like Revelation type metaphor. We see a person in chapter 1 in the book of Revelation. Here's a person where oil is dripping. That's the life and the presence of life. And that unifying presence of life happens with or without our permission, because it's something of the Spirit, not something we make happen by, being in the same building at the same time, or having going to the same Bible college, having the same doctor. No, there's, within any church, there's, for example, we can't say this absolutely, but the sense I have is that if you can go to any church with any certain set of doctrines, and within that church there's going to be 300, if there's 300 people in the church, there's going to be 300 really slightly variations of doctrine and beliefs in that church, no matter what you do. I know that it's not a good message for people who are trying to be pastors and convince their people of certain exact doctrines. Trust me, they don't either they don't get it or they don't believe. Christianity is a phenomenon. There's no, unless a house divided does not stand. Christianity is a house divided. Period. It speaks volumes that people are not hearing, and they're not happy. Chapter 6, Revelation. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures saying, as if it were a voice of thunder, "Come." Voice of thunder. I heard a voice of thunder one time. I was in a small group Bible study, and they were showing a little film, and the preacher was saying, we want the church to be like she's supposed to be, and we want it to operate in the gifts the way it's supposed to, according to the Old Testament, or the New Testament design of the church. And I heard like a boom, like a thunder. I'm not gonna fix it. Now, religion is unfixable. There's no promises in this book to the church. Huh? Yeah. Well, this is real. There's no promises to the church. There's only promises to those who overcome in the midst of the church and follow the Lamb whithersoever the Lamb goes, and lay their lives down in the similitude of how he laid his life down. Overcomers. They're the ones that receive the promises. Because seed time and harvest, we need a good harvest. In other words, we need good seed for the soil. And the Master called himself a seed. And he said, take up your cross and follow me. What does that mean? Take up your cross and be a nice seed. Be a good seed, okay? Take up your cross. That's how you can ensure the seed's going to really have life in it, is take up the cross. And, in him we live and move and have our being. In him we also died. Romans 6. We know that we've died with him, so we also live and are raised up with him. Okay, come. And I saw him, look, a white horse, and he was sitting upon it as having a bow, and there was given to him a crown, and he went forth overcoming, and so that he may overcome. What do these overcomers look like? Let's talk about what this looks like. What is it to be an overcomer? We think it's some kind of thing coming out of the sky, these are significations. These are signs and symbols of spiritual reality that we're coming into. What's being loosed, the seals are being loosed, is the reality of the inner man, who's aligned in truth and spirit, who worships the Father in truth and in spirit, who's in the Father in truth and in spirit, who's an overcomer, comes out of the midst of religion, comes out of the midst of her. There's a calling forth, come out of her, my love, come out of her. The ones that come out of her are the overcomers. So the Lamb opens the seal. That's the life that's poured out. Only the life poured out can open the seal within us. And a white horse, that means purity. That means, and what it means is a different kind of life. It's not just purity in the judgmental sense that we do, we're trying to, do they live by the standards of the law of Moses? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an inner purity. And it's because it's a different life. It's not a purity based on behavior. It's a purity based on a whole kind of new life that the seal has been taken off. Because right now, most humans, that life is sealed over them. They're not experiencing that life because it hasn't been unsealed by what? A life that's laid down. It's the only way you can unseal it, is by a life that's laid down. A life that's laid down in the similitude of the Master. But each in their own order and each in their own way. He shows the way, but everybody's cross is different. Is it what? So this is by way of the cross. I mean, this is kind of like, I think, Paul talked about the military, he talked about run the race and, fight the good fight and that kind of conversation. We don't hear much of that in church. I mean, we hear it in some kind of distorted fashion, but we don't really hear it in the sense of this, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violent take it by force. In other words, you've got to go after this thing. You've got to. There was a scene, of course, that was real. It's a controversial film, but in the film of The Passion of the Christ, there's a scene where he crawls back up on the cross. And that's a story. That whole thing is quite a story, quite a phenomenon. But the actor Jim Caviezel crawls back on the cross, and he felt like he had to be exactly as Jesus was in that time, like to be an actual actor. Anyway, that could be a real distraction from what we're talking about, maybe, but it's a pretty powerful story. You can always look it up. Jim Caviezel talking about his experience as an actor on the Passion of the Christ. But the point being, we have to get really aggressive, because it's not natural to want to crawl up on a cross. It's not natural to have to carry, to feel like we're carrying a cross. It really is not fun. It really takes an overcomer. He passed through death into life. I am he that lives and am alive forevermore. I was dead. He said, I was dead. I was dead. I was dead. Some people, he went to Egypt and married some women. He just was a spiritual master, and he didn't actually die. Well, it wasn't as gruesome as they say it was anyway. It wasn't that disgusting gruesome. It wasn't all that blood. It wasn't all that beating and pulverizing of a human being. No, it was all of that. And that kind of life poured out is the kind of life that allows us to have an ear to hear. That it breaks our ear, breaks that seal off, so we have that ear that can hear. Like in pregnancy when the baby's born, and all of a sudden has an ear to hear, and it's a breaking forth. And so much could be said here. And then that voice comes like thunder, come, and I saw it, and it is like a thunder in people. When you're coming out of the world, or coming out of spirituality or religion that has, just as a certain way to believe about something, but it becomes a spiritual reality. It is many times like a thunder in your own heart, and a calling in your heart. It's like you're being called to go to that cross and die a good death on the cross, and then rise a good resurrection in days ahead. And be on that white horse. You begin to, horse is strength, right? So that's a strength that comes from a pure spirit. And having a bow, and there was given to him a crown. So the bow is like, on target. And, having a demeanor and spirit about you that hits the bullseye every time. And also that can, go ahead and deal with the soulish energies that can be in opposition to the purity of the strength of the riding horse on white. A little bit. And you can see Cupid as an example too. But I'm not saying much about that, because that's not really what's here. But the idea, though, is that it's as straight as an arrow. There's a straightness. Remember, it has to do with reproducing oneself. Because happy is man who has a quiver full of them. Your life is being reproduced in others, supernaturally, miraculously. It's that life. It's affecting others, whether you know it or not, or they know it or not. And so a crown is just, it's a dimension of the mind of Christ, which, sorry about my hand there, dimension of the mind of Christ that is absolutely supernatural. I have to go because my lunch break is over. So that's the first verse. Well, bye.